On October 6, 1793, according to documents that survived the Temple prison's records, a boy signed his name to a statement accusing his mother of incest. He was 8 years old. The statement was placed in front of him by Jacques-René Hébert, the journalist and revolutionary official who had helped build the case against Maria Antonieta. The document listed specific accusations. The boy signed. The testimony was read aloud at his mother's trial 9 days later. She was executed on October 16th. This is what the revolution did to Marie Antoinette's son after the guillotine. Not quickly, not cleanly. Over 2 years in a medieval tower in the middle of Paris, with total legal control over a child who had no protection left and no one with the power or the will to reach him. What happened inside that tower is only partially documented. A significant portion of the Temple prison records from this period were destroyed during the Bourbon Restoration, which means that what we know comes from fragments, official receipts, guardian log entries, commission visit reports, an autopsy, and the account of a heart that spent the next 2 centuries moving from hand to hand across Europe before anyone could prove who it came from. The story begins with a separation and ends with DNA. Everything in between is what the revolution actually produced when it decided a child was too dangerous to free and too complicated to kill. Louis Charles de France was born at Versailles on March 27, 1785. He was the second son of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. When his older brother died of tuberculosis in June 1789, the same month the revolution formally began, Louis Charles became Dauphin of France at the age of 4. He was 7 when the monarchy fell. On August 10, 1792, the storming of the Tuileries Palace ended the constitutional monarchy, and the royal family was taken to the Temple, a medieval fortress compound in the center of Paris that had once been the headquarters of the Knights Templar and had since been used for various purposes, none of them comfortable. The family was held together in the Temple Tower for months. Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, their daughter Marie-Thérèse, the king's sister Madame Elizabeth, and Louis Charles. They could hear the city outside. They could not leave. On January 21, 1793, Louis XVI was guillotined at the Place de la Révolution. The Comte de Provence, the king's brother, immediately declared himself regent for the new heir to the throne. Royalists across Europe began recognizing Louis Charles as Louis XVII of France. This recognition was the problem. The revolutionary government could not execute him. He was a child. The optics were impossible, and enough of the moderate political bloc remained sensitive to optics. But they could not release him either. A living Bourbon heir was a political weapon in the hands of every monarchy in Europe that wanted to see the Republic destroyed. France was at war with Austria and Prussia. A living Louis XVII had value as a bargaining chip and danger as a rallying point. The answer they settled on was not a policy so much as a sustained improvisation. Hold him in the Temple and systematically take away everything that made him who he was. On July 3, 1793, commissioners arrived at the royal family's rooms in the Temple and removed Louis Charles from his mother. Contemporary accounts say Marie Antoinette refused to give him up for nearly an hour. The commissioners ultimately told her they would harm her daughter if she did not comply. She let him go. He was placed in the care of Antoine Simon, a cobbler and revolutionary official who had been appointed his guardian by the Committee of General Security, and Simon's wife, Marie-Jeanne. Their assignment, as described by the decree authorizing the arrangement, was to ensure the boy's Republican education, which in practice meant making him forget he was royal. What followed under Simon's guardianship is documented unevenly. The most extreme royalist accounts, particularly those written after the Restoration, describe severe physical abuse, beatings, forced intoxication, degradation. The 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica, reviewing the same period, found those extreme scenes unsupported by other testimony and noted that Marie-Jeanne Simon provided some basic care. What seems clear from multiple documentary sources, official and otherwise, is that the Simons did not raise Louis Charles as a prince. He was made to eat and drink in excess, taught the language of the gutter, and subjected to a systematic program of de-Christianization and class re-education that historians writing in the 20th and 21st centuries have generally described as psychological indoctrination. The objective, according to the mandate, was that Louis Charles was to renounce his royal origins. On October 6, 1793, 10 days before his mother's trial, officials, including Pache, Chomet, and Hébert, visited the temple and produced a written declaration for the boy to sign. The document contained accusations against his mother of acts of sexual molestation. According to the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica, drawn on primary sources, the boy signed it. He was then brought face to face with his sister Marie-Thérèse. It was the last time they saw each other. The signed statement was read at Marie Antoinette's trial on October 15th. She was asked to respond to the accusation. She looked at the assembled room and said, in words that contemporary witnesses recorded and that have been preserved in the trial transcript, that she made no answer because nature itself recoiled from such a charge, and she appealed to every mother in the room. The next day she was executed. What happened inside Louis Charles after October 6th is documented in the temple logs through the people who guarded him. According to the account of his subsequent guardian, Jean-Jacques Laurent, the boy made a private decision from that day forward. He stopped cooperating. He stopped speaking to his captors, not as a single act of refusal, but as a sustained daily commitment that he maintained for the rest of his life. Across every change in guardian and every commission visit that the Republic sent to observe him. If this interpretation is accurate, and it is Laurent's reading recorded in an official log, which makes it the closest thing to a contemporary source on the boy's state of mind, then what we are looking at in the months that follow is a 10-year-old child who had decided there was nothing left to give them. Simon and his wife left the temple on January 19, 1794. An official receipt was drawn up confirming the safe transfer of their prisoner, who was declared to be in good health. 2 days later, according to accounts that historians describe as coming from Restoration-era sources, and therefore carrying some political coloring, Louis Charles was placed in a dark room. The story, as it exists in multiple secondary accounts, is that the room was barricaded like a cage, that food was passed through bars, and that no one entered for 6 months. Paul Barras, the revolutionary politician who would go on to lead the Directory government, visited the temple after the fall of Robespierre on July 27, 1794, a date known in France as the 9th of Thermidor. His account confirms what he found, a child in a state of extreme neglect. The room was cleaned, the boy was cleaned and reclothed, a new guardian was assigned. When 3 commissioners from the Committee of General Security visited on December 19, 1794, documented by name as J.B. Armand de la Meuse, J.B.C. Mathieu, and J. Reverchon, the boy gave them nothing. No word, no response. The official record of that visit is essentially a document about silence. By the end of that same month, Louis Charles was 10 years old. In March 1795, Etienne Lazin was appointed as his new guardian. By May, the prisoner was seriously ill. A doctor named P.J. Desaulles was summoned. Desaulles had visited him earlier and had some familiarity with the case. He prescribed treatment for what appeared to be scrofula, tuberculosis of the lymph glands, along with improved diet, light, and air. On June 1st, 1795, Desaulles died suddenly. Contemporary accounts noted the possibility of poison. Nothing was proven. Several days passed before another physician was called. Philippe Jean Pelletan, a respected Parisian doctor, was brought in along with a colleague named Dumongen. On the evening of June 7th, the two guardians, Lazin and Gomin, alerted them to a crisis. The next morning, June 8th, 1795, Louis Charles died. He was 10 years old and had been in the temple for 2 years and 10 months. The revolutionary government announced his death. The royalist world immediately divided into those who accepted it and those who did not. Philippe Jean Pelletan performed the autopsy on June 9th. What he found on the body of the child documented conditions consistent with severe prior abuse. He noted scarring across the front and back of the torso, on the arms, on the legs, and on the feet. The official cause of death recorded in the autopsy was a scrofulous affection of long standing. The autopsy report describes the commissioners who were present as having told the doctors that this was the late Louis Capet's son. That phrasing matters. The revolutionary government did not call him Louis XVII. They called him to the end Louis Capet's son. The body was secretly buried in a mass grave at the Cimetière Sainte-Marguerite, a cemetery near the temple. No royal burial, no marked grave, no ceremony recorded. But Pelletan did something during the autopsy that created the one physical trace the world would eventually be able to test. He hid the heart in his handkerchief and took it home. Custom among European royal families held that the heart should be buried separately from the body. Pelletan, a royalist sympathizer, performed this tradition privately without authorization and preserved the heart in a jar of alcohol. If you go looking for what happened to that jar in the months and years after June 1795, what you find is one of the stranger custody chains in the history of forensic evidence. One of Pelletan's students became fascinated by the relic and stole it. On his deathbed, the student confessed. His wife returned the heart to Pelletan. Pelletan gave it to the Archbishop of Paris. In 1830, the Archbishop's palace was sacked during a revolutionary episode. A crystal urn containing the heart was smashed. Pelletan's son arrived afterward and retrieved it from the debris. The heart eventually made its way to the Spanish branch of the Bourbon family. It passed through multiple hands over the following century and a half. By the time it was tested in early 2000, it was described in contemporary reports as mummified, hard as wood. If you subscribe to Vicious Past, you're the kind of viewer who understands why that detail matters. Every story on this channel is about the moment protection fails and what gets left behind. Subscribe if you haven't already, and you'll see every episode as it comes. The scientists who conducted the DNA test in 2000 were Jean-Jacques Casimir, a professor of genetics at Belgium's Leuven University, and Ernst Brinkmann of Germany's Münster University. Working independently, the tests compared mitochondrial DNA extracted from the heart with samples from multiple sources. A lock of hair taken from Maria Antonieta as a child, and DNA from living relatives descended from her mother, Empress Maria Theresa of Austria. The results matched. The The heart of the child who died in the temple prison on June 8, 1795, belonged to someone with the same maternal lineage as Maria Antonieta. The historian Philippe Delorme, who had pressed for the tests, announced the result directly. It was the heart of Louis XVII. By the time those tests were conducted, more than a century of alternative histories had accumulated around the name of Louis Charles. The mechanism behind them was simple. Because the revolutionary government had disposed of the body in secret, because a large portion of the temple's records had been destroyed, and because the Republic had every political reason not to stage a transparent public accounting of what it had done to a child, the official record had gaps. Those gaps became the foundation for a sustained industry of imposture. Within years of the death announcement, men began presenting themselves as the survived Dauphin. By the time the Bourbon monarchy was restored in 1814, so many men were claiming to be Louis XVII that, according to one account from the period, doctors at asylums and guards at royal palaces had developed procedures for dismissing them. The History Channel has estimated the total number of claimants at over 100. Some sources place the figure higher. The most famous was Karl Wilhelm Naundorf, a German clockmaker who emerged in the 1830s with detailed personal memories of his childhood at Versailles. Memories specific enough that several people who had known Louis Charles in life believed him, including reportedly the boy's childhood nurse. Naundorf died in Delft in 1845. His tombstone was inscribed with the words Louis XVII, King of France and Navarre. Marie-Thérèse, the actual sister who had been imprisoned in the same temple, was still alive. She described Naundorf as a skilled impostor. DNA tests on Naundorf's remains in the 1990s confirmed that his DNA did not match the family's mitochondrial profile. The most American of the claimants was Eleazar Williams, a Protestant missionary who had been raised among the Mohawk and who, when shown a portrait of Antoine Simon, reportedly trembled. His claim was eventually tested against a Mohawk genetic profile, which made the Bourbon ancestry biologically implausible. In Wisconsin, a road is still named for the lost Dauphin. John James Audubon, the naturalist and painter, never claimed to be Louis Charles, but his murky origins, born the same year, adopted around the same time the Dauphin allegedly escaped, raised in France and then America, made him a candidate in the imaginations of people who wanted to believe the child had survived. He had not. The evidence settled by 2000, confirmed in 2 independent laboratories, buried in a state ceremony in June 2004 at the Basilica of Saint-Denis, which is the traditional burial place of French kings. The ceremony came 209 years after Philippe Jean Pelletan hid a heart in his handkerchief at an autopsy that the revolutionary government wanted quietly concluded. There is a specific quality to what happened to Louis Charles that distinguishes it from the other deaths produced by the Terror. His father was guillotined in public, in front of tens of thousands of witnesses, as the act of a republic establishing its authority. His mother was guillotined the same way, with a trial, a formal charge, and an execution that the state treated as a legal procedure. Louis Charles was given no trial. He was given no formal charge. He was not executed. What he was given was a cobbler as a guardian and a program designed to make him forget what he was. When that program did not fully work, when the signed declaration against his mother did not produce a cooperative, re-educated revolutionary citizen, but instead produced a boy who closed his mouth and did not open it again, the Republic's answer was to put him in a room and wait. The commissioners who visited him in December 1794 got no word from him. The guardians who attended him afterward documented in the temple logs a child who had simply stopped engaging with the apparatus that held him. He died of tuberculosis in a cell. The Republic buried his body in a mass grave. The doctor who conducted the autopsy took the heart home because there was no one authorized to receive it, and no institution prepared to treat the end of Louis XVII with any dignity at all. 2 centuries later, a historian held a press conference in Belgium and announced that the tests were conclusive. He did not die in the New World. He did not survive in a basket. He did not become a naturalist or a missionary or a clockmaker. He died in the temple, aged 10, from a disease that his body was too weakened to resist. The heart confirmed it. It now rests at Saint-Denis, in a crystal urn, in a chapel where French kings have been buried for 12 centuries. His parents are not there. They were buried in a mass grave too, at the Madeleine Cemetery, and were only recovered and given royal burial in 1815, 22 years after the fact, under his uncle's restored monarchy.